There are many reasons people don't ask questions, only one of which is they don't have them. Sometimes people are too nervous to go first. They're not sure what their question is. They don't want to embarrass themselves. So we don't often always get a question, even though there are questions in the room. So I can actually ask myself a question. I can leverage a back pocket question. And I do this all the time. It sounds something like this. Are there any questions about the topic I just covered? I wait a few seconds, giving people an opportunity. And when nobody says anything, I'll say, a question I'm often asked is.
Matt, I'm so excited to talk to you today. I'm really looking forward to jumping in about, talking about the structure of words and conversations. I remember there was a point in my life where I realized, kind of funny, like I was dating and then I got into sales and I was kind of like, this feels like the same thing. And then I realized that every conversation is kind of like, it has a structure, and you're selling or being sold something. And it really just got me intrigued. And then it sent me off this path of my life being a career in sales and talking. And just, I'm really passionate about it. And it's actually opened up so many beautiful relationships. And so I'm really looking forward to talking to you today and getting to share, I think, some of that passion that you have about how much it can enrich your life. And there's a few things like we'll talk about back pocket, questions and a couple of things like that you're a really big proponent of. So yeah, welcome. I'm just really grateful to have you
Josh, I'm thrilled to be with you. I wasn't sure where that conversation was going. I didn't know if you were going to say, and now I'm just in all these different romantic relationships, and
here. Yeah,
the
exactly.
difference is, I guess when you're selling things, you have to give customer service and warranties and stuff. In relationships, you don't have that same
Yeah,
obligation. So.
yeah, exactly. So man, I'd love to start just by asking you if we could reflect on the last 12 months for you, and then 12 months looking forward. If we're looking 12 months in the past, I'd love to hear some things that you're really proud of that have happened in the last 12 months and that, you really, really went well for you.
Well, on a very personal level, I'm the father of two teenagers. My wife and I are very proud of where my kids have gone. Raising teenagers in this day and age, especially coming out of COVID and other things, is hard. So very personally, I'm very proud of them and the trajectory they're on. Professionally, I have thoroughly enjoyed the podcast I host, Think Fast, Talk Smart, and really bringing this book based on spontaneous speaking, Think Faster, Talk Smarter, to the market has been truly a pleasure and rewarding. I have learned so much, and I get to meet people like you and others. So the last 12 months have been full of joy in so many ways, on a personal level with my family, on a professional level with the podcast and the book. It's been great.
Amazing. Perfect. And what about looking forward? Like, what are you most
Mm.
excited about? I'm sure the book's on there, but anything else you're just
Yeah.
really excited about coming up in the next 12 months?
So, this might sound Pollyanna-ish, but I really love helping people communicate more effectively and honing those skills. And I see a tremendous number of opportunities coming up in the next 12 months to really explore that even more and reach more people and try to help them. So I'm very excited about that.
Incredible. Perfect. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, there's something that really lights you up, doesn't there, when you explain a very simple concept to someone, you can see they click and then
Hmm.
they go off. And I've had the same experience. It's like, and I'd love to, maybe we can start there just talking a little bit about, communication. And there's something that you talk about. We're gonna dive in pretty quick and deep. One of the things that you've talked about, and that is probably one of the most common things that your guests say, is knowing your audience is one of the most
Hmm.
important things when thinking about speaking and when you're going to speak to a group of people or even individuals. So could you expand on that idea and the importance of that a little bit for me?
I appreciate you bringing that up because I think this is the foundational mistake people make in their communication, regardless of role. If you're in sales, if you're in human resources, if you're just in giving a toast for friends at a wedding or some kind of event, we start from the wrong place. We start from, what do I want to say? This is what I want to get across. And I think rather we should be asking, what does my audience need to hear? So it's not about what you want, it's about what they need. And that's critically important. We have known for a long time in the academic world that if your message is relevant, salient, and important for your audience, they will pay more attention to it. They're more likely to remember it and act on it. And so we really need to spend time doing reconnaissance, reflection, and research on who our audience is so we can tailor our message. And you're exactly right. Across all 100+ episodes we've done of Think Fast, Talk Smart, the number one common thread is know your audience. And it's said in many different ways. It's said it's not about you, it's about them. Do really dig deep into the audience. My favorite for an episode that has yet to come up, Julian Treasure, who himself is such a treasure about listening. He says, "What is the listening I am speaking into?" That's a really fun way of saying the same thing. So yes, 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 yes. So important that we look at this.
And like those three R's you spoke about, would you mind, like, if I'm not familiar with speaking contracts and don't have a lot of confidence, could you maybe like outline a couple of things that someone could do to start to implement? You know, they're going to go meet a friend today, or like maybe they're going to go and talk in a meeting. What are some quick tips you could have so someone can actually go and do this really, really fast?
Thank you. Yeah. So reconnaissance, reflection, and research. We have to spend. So if this is a planned presenting where you know, or a meeting where you know who's going to be in the room, you need to spend time thinking about them. So first and foremost, do some cyber stalking. Get online, look at their LinkedIn profiles, their company bios, etc. You can learn a lot. Try to talk to people who might have spoken before to them or know them. If you're speaking at a conference, talk to the organizers of the conference. Try to understand the people you're communicating with. You can even reach out to them. You can talk to them. You can send surveys. Spend the time doing that. Now, if you're doing something spontaneously, my new book is all about in the moment speaking, where you don't have the luxury of time to actually figure out these people. Notice what's going on in the environment. Think about people who are at this event. What brings them to this event? What might be important to them? So you need to take the time to do that kind of work. Now, the question becomes, what are you looking for? So I have a few ideas. One, you want to know their knowledge level. What do they know relative to what you are speaking on? We've all been in that circumstance where people talk too high level or too low level for us. So what do they know? Second, what are their attitudes likely to be? You will change your behavior based on the attitudes of the people you're speaking to. So you should think about it. And most importantly of these three is, what are the areas of resistance, hesitation, or concern that this audience might have? You, as somebody who's been in sales, know that it's really important to think about resistance points. So these are the things that we need to think about before we start communicating, so we can tailor our message to be more relevant and significant to them.
Yeah, totally. And I think that I even think about conversation. I'm rebuilding a relationship with my mum, and we didn't have we had a very like tough adolescence with her, and then growing up we haven't really talked much. So we're kind of like rebuilding this from scratch. And I've really been taking actually what you said and what I've learned from your podcast into these moments, and kind of doing a bit of recon on my mum and what she's up to in her life, and being like, "Oh, mum, how was that?" Like, just really like spending the time, and it actually shows that I care. And it's really interesting. Yeah. Like sometimes I meet people for the first time repetitively every day when I'm selling, but you meet people every day, and sometimes there's an opportunity to do a recon and just dive deep. And I'd love to, transition here into listening. So it's like there's knowing your audience, and I'd love to share like, what are your perspectives on listening, and what do you think a lot of people miss out on?
First and foremost, congratulations on reconnecting with your mother. I think that is so wonderful. It's I know a lot of people who have had difficult relationships with parents, and it's great to connect. So good on you for doing that.
Appreciate it.
Listening is critical. Listening is critical. You're just hitting all the top lists of things that come up on the podcast I host, which is all about communication. Number one is know your audience. Number two is listening. It really surprised me as somebody who for decades has studied communication. It really has impressed me how important listening is. We have all these courses on public speaking. We don't have courses on public listening, and we should. So listening is critical, and listening not just at a high level. Many of us are not very good listeners. We listen just enough to get the gist of what somebody is saying, and then we begin rehearsing, evaluating, judging what we want to say. To really connect, to build trust, to demonstrate empathy, you need to listen in a very intense way. I heard a talk from somebody who was a jazz musician. He was talking about one of his jazz teachers had told him, you should listen until you sweat. And I just love that image, right? Listen until you sweat. That we see listening as passive, but listening can be very active. And in the book, I have a whole chapter dedicated to listening because it's so important. And I borrow a framework from a colleague of mine. His name is Collins Dobbs. He's a lecturer at Stanford, as am I. And he talks about and teaches crucial conversations. And he has this wonderful framework that also applies nicely to listening. And it's three things: pace, space, grace. And I invite people, when you really have to listen, when listening is really important, give yourself permission to slow down. Pace is important. We are moving so fast and life is coming at us so quickly. If we can slow things down, it allows us to really connect and be present and listen. So pace is the first, and then space. And space can refer to physical space. Move into an environment that will help you listen better. So first, we've just got to get into a space physically, but also mentally, a head space. You have to focus. You have to turn down the noise that's going on in your head, judging, evaluating, worrying, etc. So you can be really present. So pace and space, and then grace. And grace is not just about being kind and empathetic. It's also about giving yourself permission to listen to your internal voice. What is it saying? Your intuition weighs heavy in these things. And somebody might say, "Oh, I'm doing great." And you're like, "That doesn't feel right." So probe and figure that out. So pace, space, grace can really help you be a more effective, connected listener.
Beautiful. I love that. I really love that. That's amazing. And could you touch a little bit on the power of, I think, paraphrasing is like, taking, listening and then reflecting back, and the impact, like it's a beautiful when you do it. I'm thinking of times when I've done it really well to somebody else, you can see they just like light up. Could you talk a little bit about that and maybe some tools to do that properly as well?
Yeah, sure. I think paraphrasing is perhaps the most valuable or one of the most valuable communication tools that we have. Let me be clear what I mean by paraphrasing. Paraphrasing to me is extracting the key essence of what somebody has said. It's not parroting back, like a 5-year-old would do, where they just repeat word for word till you get frustrated. No, this is where you are listening so intently for what is it that's the crux, the key of what somebody is saying. And in doing so, you listen better, you connect more. But in recounting your paraphrase, speaking your paraphrase, you do so much. One, you validate the person. It feels good to be listened to. We like it when somebody has listened to us. And let me be very clear, paraphrasing does not mean you agree. In fact, paraphrasing can be very useful when you're in contentious situations where there is disagreement. You are simply saying, "I understand" or "hear you." You're not saying "I agree." So there's that type of validation. But there's also a validation of accuracy of what's been said. There's no sense having a conversation or answering a question that's not what was asked or is being discussed. So when I paraphrase, you have the right to say, no, what I meant was this. So it validates as well. So how do we paraphrase better? As we are listening, first we have to do pace, space, grace. We have to focus. We have to get present. But we're listening for the key point. So I am constantly saying to myself, the bottom line here is, so Josh, as you're talking to me, when you ask me questions, I'm thinking to myself, what's the bottom line? And that's what I'm going to respond to. And it doesn't even have to be accurate, because I'm going to portray that bottom line to you and you'll give me feedback so I'll know if I'm accurate or not. So focus on that. Then state what you want to state the paraphrase, and then look for the reaction. So paraphrasing is not a one and done thing. It's not like I just say it and then I'm done. It serves as a beginning for a follow-up conversation to happen, and you have to be prepared for that. So I think paraphrasing is an amazingly powerful skill. Here's how you practice it. I encourage all of your listeners to listen to this current episode, past episodes of yours, future episodes, and pause at some point, pause the episode and think to themselves, what was the bottom line of what was just said? Think about it, and then play some more, and then do it again. You only get good at sports by drilling. You only get good at paraphrasing and communicating by drilling. So take this great podcast, use it as a way to practice paraphrasing.
Man, amazing. I mean, I'm totally just geeking out at this conversation. So I'm so curious. I haven't heard, like, how did you get into this, and where did this passion come from for you? Yeah, I'm really, I'd love to know.
So it's a confluence of many things. So very early on in my life, like when I was 7 or 8, a young boy, things happened in my life that helped crystallize the value of communication. So I'm going to tell you 2 quick stories. My brother and I collected a lot of junk, a lot of toys, a lot of collections of everything. You name it, we collected it. And my mother lost it one weekend. It's like, we have way too much stuff in here. We're having a garage sale. I don't know if garage sale translates across the world, but it's essentially a yard sale where you put stuff out, neighbors come and purchase things. And we grew up in a town where every weekend lots of people did that. Lots of yard sales, garage sales were going on. And my mother said, we're going to have a garage sale. We need to make signs. And she instructed my brother and me to spell the sign wrong. So instead of garage, we inserted a B in garage, and we had a garbage sale, not a garage sale. And that weekend, we sold more stuff than anybody in our neighborhood. And to this day, my mother still believes it's because of the misspelled sign, and that drew attention. So people came to us more than other places. Personally, I think people thought we were stupid and thought they'd get better deals. Doesn't matter. What it taught me as a young boy is that through communication, through words, you can motivate behavior. And if you'll allow me, I'll tell one other quick story. This involves my father. My father used to always read the newspaper back in the day when people actually held paper in their hands and read newspapers. And he was laughing one day. And I said, "What are you laughing at?" And he said, "Come here." And I went and looked. And he was reading the comic strips. And there was a comic of a father with his arm around his son. And the caption was, and they were looking at the store that the father clearly owned. And the caption was, "Someday, son, this will all be yours." But across the store in the drawing, it said "going out of business sale." And I was totally confused. I was like, the store's going out of business. How's it going to be his son's? And my father laughed and said, "The store is perpetually going out of business. It's a marketing ploy to get people to come in." And again, that got me thinking like, wow, we can really motivate people and influence people through communication. So I became very interested in it at a very, very early age. And ever since then, I saw interest in it in my academic studies, but when I was in the corporate world, and I ran learning and development in software companies for a long time, I saw that it wasn't the people who were necessarily the smartest or had the best ideas. It was the people who communicated best that were successful. And so I've really taken on this cause of helping people communicate better so we can hear the best and brightest and get their ideas out there.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's crazy how, and sometimes, you go through that experience and there's that learning curve of practicing this art and
Yeah.
failing miserably and like having
Yeah.
this great idea in your head and then putting it out there and people are just looking at me going, "What are you talking about?" And, being able to refine that is like, it's difficult because you're putting yourself on the line, and it can be really embarrassing.
Oh yeah.
It's
Oh
like,
yeah. And that's where anxiety comes from is people really, get nervous about doing that. And that's what inhibits so many people.
yeah, totally. Yeah. Thanks for sharing those stories. I'd love to like, touch back on, if we go back to paraphrasing, like the power of when someone says, "Oh no, that's not right." And then they get the opportunity to correct you. That's actually an amazing place to be, and how I think the power of no is when someone says no, they feel confidence. Could you expand on that? And really, it allowed me to go, "Oh, I'm just going to give this paraphrasing thing a shot, because if I get it right, it's great. And also if I get it wrong, they're probably going to feel better."
Absolutely. No, I mean, so what you do in that moment where you give somebody an opportunity to correct or hone what it is they've said or you've said, you're showing that you're concerned and that you care. It's a way of lowering your status. So imagine I'm a boss and you're my employee, and I ask, "Did I get it right?" That makes us more equivalent. I'm giving you permission to correct me, and yet at the same time demonstrating that you and this communication are so important to me. I want to make sure I have it right. So getting that no is not a bad thing at all. In fact, it'll bring you closer together. Many of us feel like we have to be right in our communication. I have to get it right. And one, that's not realistic. And two, it puts so much pressure on you, it reduces the ability to do many of your communications well. So being open to feedback is incredibly important.
Yeah. And, speaking of going from, changing this perspective from conflict to collaboration, would you mind telling the toothpaste story and the power of,
Yes, yes, yes. It's funny that you bring that up. So the biggest fight my wife and I ever had was over toothpaste. When we first moved in with each other, we got married, we moved in with each other. Um, all of our fights actually had to do with the bathroom, the toilet. We would fight over toothpaste. My wife is a roller and I'm a squeezer. And as soon as I say that, I'm sure you think, "What are you?" And everybody thinks that. And it is amazing how strong we hold our position about how to best get toothpaste out of a tube. Like, I'm a squeezer, and I think that is the absolute right way to do it. For me, it's an act of aggression. I feel confident. I get the right amount out. But to a roller, the worst thing you can do is be married or be with a squeezer because we ruin your methodical work that you do. And so my wife and I would fight over this. Now, of course, you and your listeners are thinking this is stupid. Just get 2 tubes of toothpaste, and that's in fact to this day that's what we have. But really, what this did for us is it really helped us understand that this conflict was not about toothpaste. This conflict was about respect and respecting the other person's preferences. And once we resolved the toothpaste thing, we had a whole bunch of other issues. Is the toilet seat lid up or down? Is the toilet paper over or under? Like I said, it all took place in the bathroom. But really, it boiled down to respect. And it wasn't until we started addressing respect that we were able to actually resolve these issues. And the lesson in all of this, besides get 2 tubes of toothpaste, is that you really have to get to the underlying issues. Often in conflict and even negotiation, we are focused not on the right issues. We're often focused on symptoms, not sources. And so we have to take the time to step back, again, pace, space, grace, and really try to figure out what's the key issue. And of course, my wife, being much smarter than I am, is the one who pointed this out to me. I was willing to really dig in and fight for my squeezing my toothpaste.
I'm going to die on this hill with this toothpaste.
Yeah, it's a hill of Colgate or Crest toothpaste. That's right. But the point is, you have to take a step back. And a lot of success in communication, especially interpersonal communication, I think is the ability to step back, reflect, and try to really understand the other person's perspective. And if you do that, I think a lot of the challenges people experience either go away or get far easier to deal with.
Totally. Do you have a couple of questions that you use frequently that help get to that layer deeper, like that someone can have, ready to fire to get past the surface?
Yes. So my mother-in-law, she is now deceased, but she was an amazing person, and she had a great question. Her question was simply, tell me more. Tell me more. And just being open to that. I grew up in a family. I love my family. I learned a lot from my family. I am a product of that family. But in my family, the way we expressed love was through criticism, and the way we got our voices heard was by speaking louder and longer than anybody else. So when I met my mother-in-law for the first time and I finished saying something, I was shocked when she actually looked at me and said, tell me more. Nobody in my family has ever asked anybody to say more. And it's such a powerful tool because it says, I'm interested, it gives you more insight, and it allows you to better understand where people are coming from. So that's a go-to. I also will say, help me understand. As a teacher, as a parent, I will use help me understand that. Another tool that my wife and I use, and we learned this from other friends, and it actually has a name, and I forget the name of it, but when we have a disagreement or heading towards a disagreement, what my wife and I will do is simply give a relative ranking of how important this issue is to us, because we can make conflict go away. So I'm going to take something very trite and banal. Let's say my wife and I want to go out to dinner. We've agreed we're going to go out to a restaurant, but she wants to go out for Italian food. I want to go out for Mexican food. This could be a fight. We could have a contest. This could be conflict here. But my wife might say, going out to Italian food for me is a 5 on a scale of 1 to 10. And maybe I'm really craving Mexican food, and for me, it's an 8 or a 9. We don't have any conflict. We go to the Mexican food, right? So sometimes just revealing to others how important something is can change the dynamic of the conversation. And we have this bias. We assume that the people we're communicating with see what we're saying, what we're talking about, as is important to them as it is to us. And the reality is that's not true. It might be a little important to you and very important to me. And yet we could have a conflict because I assume it's as important to you as it is to me, when in fact it's not. So just laying that out up front can make a lot of things go better.
I'm literally, after this podcast, I'm going to go talk to Bianca, and we're thinking about moving to Medellin, Colombia, and we're trying to decide,
oh, wow.
Do we live in downtown, or whereas I want to live out of the town in the mountains?
Sure.
And so I'm like, well, how important is it? Like, let's figure this out, because we've been talking about this for 3 days.
Right. If it's a 10 to you and a 5 to her, the decision's made. If you're
Totally.
both at 8s, then you have to have a very different conversation.
Absolutely.
But at least going in, you're not making the assumption.
Yeah, I love that, man. That is fantastic. That's so incredible. And what would you say, like, some common, I think, pitfalls you see for people to go the opposite way? and so that they can maybe have some awareness around, well, I'm communicating in a detrimental way to my, relationships, maybe, rather than a positive way or neutral.
Well, so I think being self-centered, and I don't mean selfish. There's a difference between being selfish and self-focused and self-centered. Uh, Gets us in trouble. We have to be other focused when we communicate. So in this conversation you're going to have with Bianca, think about it from her perspective. What are the issues, challenges, and concerns? And that doesn't mean you have to take her point of view. That just means inform your point of view based on that, right? And that will help. If nothing else, it shows that you are being empathetic and concerned, and that will lead you to a more successful place. Most of us, when we enter interactions, are so focused on what we want to say or our perspective that it locks us into a way of communicating, in a way of seeing the world that can, in some cases, help us, but in most cases, work against us. So I think it's that self-focus that gets in the way, and it's natural to do. So it really takes a moment to tell yourself, hey, what's in it for the other person? What's the value from their perspective?
And so much of like what you're talking about comes back to prep. It's like taking those extra 5 to 10 minutes of just like, okay, I'm going to have this conversation, thinking about it, and then engaging allows me to go. Whereas in the moment, that's next to impossible. I've found, sometimes I can catch myself, but it's pretty rare, that I'm able to catch myself once the flow of the conversation started.
You look like a fit individual. Did you play a sport, or do you still play a sport?
Yes. Yeah. I did.
What was your sport?
Boxing.
Oh, I love it. So I'm a big martial artist too. Oh, we can totally go down that path.
Sweet.
I love it. So then you absolutely know, as somebody who does martial arts, boxing, etc., you have to train, you have to drill. It's all about responding, right? There's a difference between reacting and responding. Reacting means to act again, and that takes time. Responding is to just immediately move. And the way you get better at thinking about your audience or being other focused is you have to train it. You have to drill it. So when you watch another conversation, you watch a TED Talk, listen to a podcast, whatever, ask yourself, what was the speaker thinking about was important to their audience that helped them structure it or craft it this way? And by doing that kind of thinking, it trains you. Just like, in jiu-jitsu, you practice your throws, you practice your grappling over and over again. So when you're in the midst of a match or, God forbid, a threatening situation, you just respond. And that's how we train our brain. So you can actually, in spontaneous communication, use your practice to help you do this more readily. But you have to prepare. And that's the irony of preparing for spontaneous communication is you can actually practice and prepare. Many people are thinking, isn't that antithetical to spontaneity? No, we are in many facets of our lives preparing to be spontaneous.
Totally. Yeah, it's amazing. Like, it's such a good reference because it's like, I remember that first time I rolled and it's like my heart rate just wouldn't go down. And I was like, I'm getting smothered by a person. Like, there's like another human being on you. And then now I'm just like, it's such a comfortable space, and it's just like, it's the same thing with those conversations or high conflict feelings and emotions racing through you. Like, oh, this is like, I'm used to this. It's
That's
like,
exactly
it's
right.
not bad.
That's exactly right. And for people who don't know, rolling is where you're grappling with somebody on the ground.
So what do you? So tell me. I'd love to know, what do you do? Like martial arts? What's your background? And...
So I am much older than you. I've studied martial arts for 40 years now. I've dabbled in many styles and continue to. I still train and teach pretty religiously. It's a style called Kenpo is the one that I've done the longest.
Cool.
It's where my highest rank is. But I've studied lots, and as I've gotten older and perhaps wiser, I'm moving more into softer styles, doing a lot of Tai Chi, Qigong,
Beautiful.
Bagua, Xingyi, more of the soft. Although the more you study them, you realize they're not super soft styles. They're actually pretty brutal. But so I love it. And I'll tell you, and maybe this has been your experience, but the martial arts have taught me so much about life, so much about relationships, so much about how to connect and be present. I am a better person in my professional life and personal life because of the study of the martial arts.
Infinitely. Yeah. And it's like crazy. Like you go in there, or my experience was I went in there and quite intimidated. Like the first place I went to was an MMA gym. And so there's like these guys that are just shredded and just like sparring. And you're like, oh my God, where am I? Like, and then everyone is just so kind. Like the
Isn't it
kindest people you've
amazing?
ever met. It's just like, and they're so humble and they're just so welcoming,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh my god, like I'm still scared, but like it's just like, you
No, and
know,
that's the funny thing about it is that has been my experience too. I mean, there are the occasional exceptions to the rule,
of
but
course.
everybody is so kind and compassionate. And what I remind people who don't understand this or appreciate it is martial art. The art part is about connecting. It's about creativity. It's about collaboration. We tend to focus on the martial piece, and we see stuff on TV and in movies, but it's really some of my best connections and friends come from that world.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's incredible. That's so cool, man. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, yeah,
As we like, I'd love to just make sure we touch on one more piece, which I think
sure.
is on the preparation side of things. We mentioned at the start back pocket questions. Could you
Yes.
say what that is and the context and how? Yeah, yeah, just expand on it because I'm a big fan
Yeah,
of how you talk about it.
I've been so pleased and surprised at how this notion has really resonated with people. I wrote an article for HBR Online. This is something I've been coaching my students and the people I coach for a long time. A back pocket question is simply a question that you have prepared that you can ask in a situation to help you out of a tricky situation. And a lot of tricky situations happen when you're speaking spontaneously. Let me give you two examples. Many times we ask if there are questions. We do Q&A and we say, does anybody have a question about what I just said? Or I've got 2 or 3 minutes to take questions. And there's this awkward silence and pause where nobody asks a question. So what most people do is they go, oh, okay, I guess there are no questions, thanks. And it sort of feels unfulfilling, awkward. There are many reasons people don't ask questions, only one of which is they don't have them. Sometimes people are too nervous to go first. They're not sure what their question is. They don't want to embarrass themselves. So we don't often always get a question, even though there are questions in the room. So I can actually ask myself a question. I can leverage a back pocket question. And I do this all the time. It sounds something like this. Are there any questions about the topic I just covered? I wait a few seconds, giving people an opportunity. And when nobody says anything, I'll say, a question I'm often asked is, or recently somebody asked me this. And I ask myself a question and then I answer it. And amazingly, other questions follow up. People just don't want to go first. Now, of course, know the answer to the question you ask yourself. Don't stump yourself, but it's a good way to get things going. I'll give you another example of where a back pocket question can help. The biggest fear people report to me around communication is that they're going to blank out, they're going to forget. Now, interestingly, the fear of blanking out itself makes it more likely that you will blank out. So we need to reduce that fear. And quite frankly, most people don't blank out. The fear far precedes the reality. But if you were to blank out, if it were to happen, what helps most people is just to take a little bit of time to recollect their thoughts. But what happens is we panic and it's really hard to think. So by using a back pocket question, I, in essence, can distract my audience. I do this when I teach. There are times when I teach that I forget what I want to say next. I teach the same course or I teach similar courses. I can't remember, did I say this, did I not? So I blank out. And what I'll do is I'll just stop for a moment and I'll ask my students, I'll say, I'd like to take a moment to have each of you think about how what we just discussed can be applied in your life. Now, my students aren't thinking, oh, Matt forgot. They're thinking like, how do I apply this to my life? That's right, I should. So in essence, I've distracted them on something that's relevant to give myself a little breather. And I believe everybody can come up with a question that you can ask as part of your communication that distracts people long enough to get yourself you're back on track. So a back pocket question is nothing more than something you think about in advance that can help you in tricky situations like when you don't get questions and you want them or you blank out with what to say.
Yeah, yeah, and I've even taken that idea
Mm-hmm.
into my one-on-one like sort of random interactions. So like when you
Uh-huh.
first meet someone, I still get the feeling sometimes when I've done it so many times where I just like I see someone, I start talking to them, and then I'm like, what do I say next? And it's like having that in that I feel like it takes the pressure off bumping into random people, meeting random people, talking to people at a coffee shop.
Yeah.
Like even still, sometimes I'll be standing next to someone at a coffee shop and we're both like,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
silence.
No. Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
No, that's great. Yeah. So the harder when it comes to chit chat and small talk, the two hardest parts are how do you start it and how do you end it. And so if you
yeah.
have an idea that
Mm,
doesn't sound too formulaic, I think it can be really awesome to to just use a back pocket question to help.
Yeah, absolutely. I had this. It was so funny. I was standing with Bianca and I were shopping for some groceries the other day, and she went into there was like a really tight store with like a little staircase, and so I was kind of standing out the front, and I was just like standing there chilling, and then this guy came out and like started smoking a cigarette from this other store, and he was looking ragged. Like I was like, I don't know if he'd slept the night before, and we were like not in close proximity, like we were quite a distance away,
Yeah.
and it was as I wasn't standing still anymore, so I'd started walking up the steps, and this dude just like kind of half yells. He's like, "So where are you from?" And I was like, like jarred by it. And I was like, wow. I was like, oh, Australian, man. Like, sorry, bro, I got to go. And like, was already walking in. And I was like, wow, that was such a good example of what a jarring, like the statement.
Yeah, exactly.
Feel like.
Yeah. It's right. You want something subtle. And the best advice I have received from many people is just notice something in the environment. Comment on something in the environment. I literally did this. I was at a conference the other weekend, and I was standing next to somebody in line. And it was awkward. We'd been there a long time, and it was sort of like we should probably talk. And so I just said to the person, I have never seen so many people in blue shirts. For some reason, everybody had different colored blue shirts on. And the person was like, yeah, that's a really amazing. And all of a sudden, we struck up this great conversation. And all I did, it wasn't a question. It was well, it could have been a question, but all I did was point out an observation of what was going on in the environment. Could make a big difference.
Yeah, huge. And do you mind, like, as we wrap up, telling us a bit about the upcoming book? Like, and I mean, I'm a huge fan of your podcast. I really loved the one, or is it Jonah Berger? Berger?
Yeah.
Berger?
Yeah.
That was fantastic. Highly recommended. Everyone go and listen to that. And yeah, I'd love to hear a bit about the book and.
Sure. So thank you. So I host a podcast, Think Fast, Talk Smart. It's all about communication, about 20, 30-minute episodes. So really tight. We focus on different concepts. The Jonah Berger episode was all about how language and wording matters. We talk about everything from negotiation to persuasion to creativity to managing anxiety, lots of cool things. And then the book itself is called Think Faster, Talk Smarter. I'm not very creative with how I name things. And the book leverages a lot of the learnings from the podcast, from my teaching at Standford, from friends and colleagues. And it's all about how to speak better in the moment. If we ever have done any training or learning about communication, it's mostly planned. You're creating a presentation, a pitch, a meeting. But most of our communication in our professional and personal lives happens in the moment. It's spontaneous, right? Somebody asks a question, you're thrown onto the spot to give a toast. You make a mistake and you have to fix it. So the book is really a methodology to help people do that. And you can learn more at mattabrahams.com. Lots of stuff about the book. And I'm a big user of LinkedIn. Anybody can link in with me.
Is there a date that's coming out? Like, how are we looking for timeline?
Thank you. Yeah, so in the United States, the book comes out September 26th. In the rest of the world, it comes out on September 28th.
Sweet. Are you going to do an audio version? Is that
there is? Yes,
pipeline?
Thank you. One of the hardest things I have ever had to do, Josh, was I was locked in a room for 4.5 days, and I had to read my book. So yes, there's an audio book. I read it. I love how it came out. It was so hard because I realized that I have the utmost respect for voice actors after doing that. Crazy.
Wow. What did you find was difficult about it?
So there are legal requirements for the Americans with Disability Act, which I support 100%. But every word in the book has to be read exactly as it's written. And I write differently than I speak. And so as I'm reading something, I would change it to sound more like I would say it in conversation rather than writing it. And I had to go back and fix it. And so it was hard to keep myself to the literally letter and word.
Wow, that's savage. Did you have to go back, like when you went back to a section, did you have to kind of make sure it sounded the same so they could merge?
So you'd have to go back and do the whole section. And you've got somebody who's talking, somebody's tracking every word you say. And when you make a mistake, they say, nope, go back. Nope, go back. And it could be like, oh. So it was hard, but I love it. The outcome of the book is great. The audiobook sounds really good. I think it's really useful. I love audiobooks. Yeah. And so,
especially when the author writes it like you did, that's amazing. Like you can feel the passion, as I can imagine in your voice when you did that.
Well, thank you. We'll see. But anyway, I appreciate the opportunity. I hope it's helpful to everybody.
Dude, amazing. And one last question. I'd love to just, with this journey that you've had of, understanding communication and all the things you've gone on, What are some things that it's some opportunities maybe, or some things that have happened in your life that you probably don't think would have happened if that you'd chosen this path, and that you're really excited about, or that you love that have happened?
So for me, it's all about relationships. I wouldn't
Mm,
have gotten to meet people. I
yeah.
love learning, and learning comes through people. And so I have learned so much about my topic. I've learned how to be a better communicator, a better person as a result of meeting people. I would have never met you. I would have never met a lot of the guests that I have on my podcast or the people I interviewed for the book. So for me, the biggest benefit of doing this selfishly has been to meet people and learn from them.
Incredible.
It has been fantastic. I love it. I didn't think of writing a book or hosting a podcast would be about enriching my own life so much, but it has been. And if I can bring any enrichment to others, then it has been truly rewarding.
Dude, you have for my life. I'm really excited to get to share with you, you with the world. And I've already shared you with friends of mine who are really just like, they're entering this world, and they're realizing the importance of it, So yeah, thanks for all the amazing work you put out there.